Hello. I had just finished reading the Decameron by Bocaccio. This is the Waldman translation. It's about 600 pages. What is it about? If you've never heard of the Decameron, it's about, well, it was written during the bubonic plague, the Black Plague in Italy. Um, so it was around what, the 14th century or so, 14th, 15th century. And the Black Plague is sweeping Europe, and it's kind of like COVID, but actually bad. And this group of young Florentines, people from Florence, Italy, young adults, doesn't really say their age, but a group of like 10, 7 women and 3 men, they leave Florence so they could enjoy the countryside and sort of escape this hell that has hit Europe. Um, Fortunately for them, they have access to beautiful countryside villas. These villas are going to provide a nice escape from the bubonic plague. And while these 10 young adults are out there, they're going to be telling each other stories. So the entire book of the Decameron is essentially a compilation of like 1,000 stories. So every chapter is one person taking turns to tell a story within 10 days, hence the name Decameron. Deca, 10. Um, where do I begin? I'm just going off the cuff. Well, actually, just I read it like 2 weeks ago, so not everything is fresh off the top of my head. But I'm just gonna try to express my thoughts on it in a candid manner. I'm not really gonna analyze it or go really deep. I just want to give basically some thoughts, almost as if I treat these videos as if, what if my coworker asked me, what have I just read? And all. This is just an example of, oh, this is just a book I've read. I'm not a literary analysis, a literary critic. I'm barely literate myself. I'm a slow reader. So this 600-page book took me a few weeks. But the good thing about the Decameron is that, despite it being pretty long, it reads easy. The stories are really enjoyable. They're cozy. Some of them are shocking. Some of them are heartwarming. Some are beautiful. Some are romantic. Some are strange. There's a little bit of everything. There's a little bit of every genre, essentially. Since these 10 young adults take turns each day telling a different story, and each day is based on a different genre that one of the the king or queen of the group of that day decides. So there's a lot of variance in these stories and the genres, and yeah, well, so I have the Oxford translation. This is the Waldman. I've seen online that there are a few people who don't like this translation. It's kind of written in academic, not academic, just like a collegiate level Englishman. So there's a lot of interesting phrases, interesting words, hard words. I definitely had to use my dictionary a lot, but I found that once I was in the groove of it, it was actually very enjoyable to read, and I think I'm really glad that I picked this version up. At first, I remember thinking in the first like 50 pages, it was kind of a slog because I wasn't quite getting the cadence, I wasn't getting the rhythm. It felt clunky, but again, I think if you just settle in and trust yourself and be patient, it actually ends up being really, really enjoyable and clever and witty. And Waldman, well, again, I never read the Italian version or but it just, it reads well, is all I can say. And it's almost like, it just feels good to read this version, if that makes sense. It feels like, you're learning, and it feels like it just feels edifying for some reason. It's just a pleasure too. It's very evocative, and I'm sure that's large in part to Bocaccio. But I enjoyed this translation. I'm glad I read it. It's a little hard, but um, once you get into it, it reads very well. Um, let's see. If my cohort asked me, we're like, what are the stories? What are some of the stories about? Well, again, each day of the Decameron is different. For example, some days are about love. Some days are about generosity, magnanimity, um, comeuppance, revenge, uh, romance. I think I said that, but there's a lot of different tropes that are being presented. I looked online. It turns out Boccaccio had some artistic license with some of these stories. So some of the stories are his own, while many are either classics from the canon. For example, like Ovid. I think it was Ovid, or some of the stories are taken from older Latin classics. Some are taken from what is it, Arabian sources. Um, so not everything is brand new, but at least it's retold in his own voice. So I'm sure it was refreshing at the time. Some are also again like naughty comics from France, um, turned into short stories. A lot of this, a lot of these stories are kind of cozy, even when they're kind of gross. Like you could imagine being at a bonfire with a group of friends or with your family, and everyone's just telling a funny or interesting story that they know. That's what the Decameron gives off a lot. It's just a cozy, let's tell stories. Doesn't matter what genre. Like let's just have fun and forget that we left our awful work, we left our school, we left our everything. But of course, in this case, they left the bubonic plague, which for them, I assume, was far graver. Um, but that's something that I enjoyed about the Decameron is how cozy it felt. It felt it felt warm to read. Um, Although, of course, some of the stories were pretty shocking, and one of the maybe defects that it that Boccaccio, well, one of Boccaccio was censored by the papacy because they thought he had a very strong anti-clerical sentiment in the stories. And I'm a practicing Catholic, and as I was reading it, I personally didn't necessarily get much of that anti-clerical sense. It was more like anti-hypocrite. It seems that, sorry, my cat's gonna mess up the camera. So the anti-clerical stuff, it's definitely there, okay, but it's not anti-clerical as in, oh, like Boccaccio is this libertine who hates the Catholic Church. It's more so Boccaccio sees hypocrisy in a lot of religious. He sees a lot of deceit in many priests, monks, and he echoes that through his stories because a lot of the stories are monks or priests who are acting pretty naughty and they're not acting morally right. For example, one of the most salient stories that I remember because it was so shocking, and I remember reading it, I audibly gasped because so one of the short stories was that there was a young girl who wanted to seek God. So she goes out into the desert to where she's heard about these ascetic monks, right? And she thinks maybe she could learn from them. So she goes out to the desert and finds this one monk who lives by himself. He's this older man, and he takes advantage of her. He notices that she's 14 or 15, and he notices her beauty, and he basically has her stripped naked to teach her how to pray correctly, And then on top of that, he violates her. He says that his erect penis is the devil. Oh no, yeah. He says that his erect penis is the devil. So he's taking advantage of her what is it, her nativity, her innocence, because she doesn't know, she's presumably a virgin, doesn't have experience. And he says that her vagina is hell, and that he wants to send the devil his penis to hell, her vagina. So they, of course, get into several dalliances together. And I remember reading that, and I was like, "That's crazy! Like that wouldn't even fly in today's culture, right?" And it was so shocking because at the end, they just sort of treat it like a joke because she ends up going back to her town, and she's sort of the laughing stock because of the ideas that she brought back. But that's one example. Another example is like when there's just priests who lie, or priests who sleep with who sleep with wives of husbands, and do a lot of subterfuge. They engage in a lot of subterfuge and adultery. And of course, this is shocking when you read it because you don't want to hear about priests doing that. But it's not like priests are infallible. They're humans like anyone else. I never got the vibe or sentiment that Boccaccio is necessarily like anti-church. It's more just like he notices that there's a lot of corruption within the clergymen, and he calls it out in a in a playful but sometimes severe way. There was some, I guess, some diatribes where Boccaccio was kind of going off on these hypocrites, calling, you know, like priests, they're supposed to be ascetic, they're supposed to be morally upright, they're supposed to be these beacons of Christ, and they're doing the opposite. They're leading worldly lives, they're cheating, they're fornicating. He tells of one priest who had vials of perfume and all kinds of ointments and lotions in his office. Like as worldly as it gets. And then he goes outside and sort of pretends by his occupation that he's like this holy man. But of course, not every priest is like that, and there are examples of good priests in the book. And there's even one of the first stories is is where there's a Jew who's living in Italy, and one of his Italian friends who's Catholic is like, hey, like what is it going to take you to when are you finally going to convert to the true faith? And the Jew is like, never, never, never. And then I forgot how it went, but I think the Italian basically has him. I don't know if it was a bet, or he's like, hey, look, I bet if you visited Rome and visited the the cathedrals and the holy city of Rome, you would probably convert, because you're going to notice how beautiful and amazing and holy the Catholic faith is, and you're going to convert. So the Jew goes to Rome, and he on the contrary, again, he actually sees the opposite. He sees a lot of corrupt priests, reprobates. He sees them whining and dining, and just not leading the holiest of lives. And ironically, he does convert. The Jew converts to Catholicism because on his return back to his friend, to his hometown, he's like, there's no way that the true God would allow such corruption to happen in this church, yet have the Catholic faith maintain its stronghold on Europe for so long. So it was almost like an opposite effect. Like the Jew was saying that only God's true religion could really stay fast despite all these bad priests and corrupt clergymen, and so he converts. So it's kind of like a half and half. So it's like saying Boccaccio is saying, or not Boccaccio, but he's implying that the Catholic faith is real, but there are a lot of bad people within the church. And imagine Boccaccio saying that in the 14th century, right, when Catholicism is essentially the main religion of Europe. To be saying that back then, imagine today, which of course, if you're Catholic or if you keep up with Catholicism, the church is probably in one of the worst states of all time. 'Cause, yeah, so the scandals, the modernism, the heresy, the black masses in Rome, etc. All this other stuff. So it's like a Jew today who would visit Rome and say, "Hey, I'm actually turning Catholic because how is it that all these all these men in the church, all these scandals, yet the Catholic faith still goes on?" And maybe that's not the best argument, but I think in those maybe in the 14th century it was a little more salient or a little more accessible. But nonetheless, I don't think Boccaccio was anti-Catholic, because I think a lot of people read this and they probably think, "Oh, this book is against Catholicism. It's anti-clerical," and it was censored by the papacy. It was put on the index, which is the list of forbidden books, and then it was taken off and revised, etc., etc. I actually think some of the stories were the raunchy stories were worse than the anti-clerical ones, because some of the raunchy stories were just straight up kind of like filthy and erotic and just reeking of sin. Of course, it was treated in a funny manner, so I'm not sure if levity kind of erases some of that sin from it. But I found that some of the raunchy stories were far worse than the anti-clerical stories, just because it was like it was almost like reading smut sometimes, because there's a lot of like cucking going on in the stories. That's also a big theme: adultery, cuckoldry. Um, there's the famous story from the Golden Ass, which is written in what is it in Rome? It's like Old Latin by Publius. It's a famous story that Boccaccio reworked, where, but it is kind of funny. Um, so one of the stories was that there's this husband and a wife. The husband's kind of a dumb guy, like a dumb, I don't want to say blue collar, like he just works, but they live kind of a poor lifestyle. And while he goes to work, the wife is cheating on him with some guy. And then the one day the husband comes home from work kind of early for some reason, while the suitor the while the while his wife is pretty much having a extramarital affair in their home, and she's pissed off and she goes and yells at the husband and she hides the guy, and then she's yelling at the husband saying, "What are you doing? Like, you're lazy, like can't believe you're like coming to work early when you know we don't have money, like how dare you?" And the husband kind of just takes a beating. He's kind of one of those like cucky like floor mat floor mat husbands. And the funny part was when, so while the guy's kind of like probably hiding in the closet or something, there's like this, it's I don't know if it's like a wine or a beer casket, like a large one in their home, and she says that she tells the husband that he should sell it to make money instead of just coming home early and not working. And so the wife has the husband clean up the inside of that casket. And since it's a large casket, the husband has to like go deep inside of it and clean it. And that while he's in there, she's kind of inspecting him while he's cleaning it from the inside, from the hole, the aperture. And she's basically getting um, she's getting it from behind from the suitor while she's watching the husband clean from the inside. So it's kind of funny. It's silly. It's frivolous, but it is pretty raunchy. Um, and there's a lot of other stories that were pretty raunchy and funny. Um, there is also actually a lot of beautiful parts too. Like actually, one of my favorite parts of the Decameron was sort of like the in between the storytelling. There would be very minor scenes where they would go walk around, they would dance, they would have fun, they would kind of frolic in the countryside. So it was very bucolic and very uh, just like a cool. It gave a cool vibe. And there's one point where they enter like this beautiful valley that's just Bocaccio does so well in describing. It's just basically like a paradise in the countryside, like beautiful ponds with fish, and the sun's out. It's just like a sylvan landscape, flowers and birds chirping, singing, just very very paradise like. And I think those were some of the highlights for me, just because it was just a pleasure to read. It was just enjoyable and and cute, I guess. um, yeah. The What else would I be able to say about it? I'm not sure. I guess a good thing too is so even though these 10 young adults they're all single, none of them are married. One thing that Boccaccio did too that was pretty well is that they were all virtuous when they lived there, when they were all hanging out and sleeping in these villas. Meaning they weren't like getting drunk. They were drinking and eating lavish feasts, but sort of subdued. Like they weren't having orgies. They weren't doing anything weird. They were going to bed at a reasonable time, waking up at dawn. So that's something that was kind of cool too. Is that they these 10 young adults weren't being salacious or inappropriate. And in some of the stories when they're being told, like the women, they blush for shame, or they sort of look down, or they say they'll even comment or make make certain comments about the inappropriate nature of some of the stories. So it's not like, I don't think the Decameron is as immoral as people make it out to be. I think some people could. I think if you're like a secular or an atheistic person, I think you could read much more into it. And I kind of don't. I don't know. I didn't really get that vibe, just because of stuff like that, where they were still pretty innocent by the end. They never did anything crazy themselves. Stories are crazy, but I feel like the stories are meant to edify or to entertain. Well, they are to entertain. For example, Boccaccio in the introduction, he kind of. Oh, I guess this is actually another possibly big theme too. Is that Boccaccio in the introduction, he says how a lot of these stories are inappropriate and they are kind of vulgar, and but he kind of knows it. He knows that's the purpose. Like, and he sort of has the idea that his audience is going to be women. And this is kind of strange at the time because it seems like Boccaccio would be like a proto-feminist in a way, because he's explicitly saying that he wants women to be the main audience of his works. But he does that because at the time women lead pretty rough lives. Like they're mothers, they're taking care of the home, they're presumably doing a lot of household chores and even outside work. Like they live pretty, what's the word? They just lead difficult lives. Whereas men at that time seem to have more freedom. They're out and about. A lot of men are going to different towns, they're adventuring, they're doing this and that. They have a little more freedom. So Boccaccio is sort of having this, would it be empathetic view on women, saying like, let women have some fun. Like, girls just want to have fun. Let them read these like funny, silly stories to keep them entertained. Like like life doesn't have to be so dull. Doesn't have to be so staid, so plain. So in a way, I kind of like that. Like, I think that's more than reasonable. That's a reasonable take. Um, and I don't think it means he's like a proto-feminist, because at the end of the day, he's still Catholic. He still believes in anything that the Catholic Church teaches. And even besides the Decameron, Boccaccio ends up um, doing holy orders towards the end of his life. So he actually becomes a clergy member for all intents and purposes. Like, he's not a priest, but he's a minor order, which is, I forgot what minor order is, but it's just like a like a mini not a mini priest, no. I don't want to butcher it, but minor orders is that he does business with the church. He's part of the church hierarchy in a sense, but at a very minor level. I'm not sure if he took any vows, but I'm sure you can Google that, or someone can correct me. I'm gonna butcher that for sure. But he was Catholic his whole life, or at least he ended up being much more Catholic later on. So I don't think anything is that un-Catholic about the Decameron. What else would I say? I guess that's all I could say. Again, basically 1,000 stories, delightful to read. Sometimes some of them are boring, honestly. I would say like 10% of the stories or less are kind of dull or boring, or I remember just thinking, but on the bright side, they're all really short. Some some stories are a little longer, but usually the longer ones are actually much more entertaining, because they kind of, it built on itself and had this grand plot. Like, one of the most famous stories is of Griselda. Griselda was this poor girl who caught the eye of a rich man, and the rich man married her, which was kind of rare. Usually it's the other way around. Usually a man would usually try to marry like above his rank, or yeah, he would marry above his rank or equal. He wouldn't choose like a poor girl. So this guy, he chooses Griselda, who's this poor girl, but she's so innocent and beautiful. And the guy basically treats her like absolute garbage for her whole life. And he does this on purpose because he wants to test her, which is, I remember reading it and I thought it was ridiculous. The husband is testing her limits. So they have kids, and he sends the kids away. He takes her kids, their kids, sends them off to like far away lands. He just reprimands her. He ends up even kind of like quasi divorcing her, like setting her aside, and like he like marries. He's about to marry someone else, and the whole point of that story was that no matter what, that Griselda was always virtuous and always took all her. She carried her cross, so she never complained. She just took it all, and in the end, she was rewarded by her family back. So the husband, after years and years of torture and psychological abuse, he he finally says, okay, like, this is actually a good wife. Like, she and they have this grand feast at the end. I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous, but again, it just goes to show like a virtuous woman is one who doesn't complain that much and takes her trials with patience and humility. But that's one of the famous stories. But yeah, that was one of the good ones. It's just out of the sheer entertainment and kind of craziness of it. Of course, it has good meaning, but you know, I would never. I, I don't know. I think if a woman were to be subject to that, like I think she would have almost every right to, I don't know. Well, not divorce, but I don't know. Maybe she's a saint. She is a saint. Griselda's a saint. Um, but yeah, beautiful stories, beautiful stories, awesome ones. The the ones about generosity were really cool. Um, the comeuppance, just a lot of wonderful short reads. Of course, I don't remember them all off the top of my head. Especially, I finished this like 2 weeks ago, and there's 1,000 stories. Not all of them are quite presentable off their off the top of my head, but overall, super super cool book. I'm actually really glad I read it because I picked this up like 10 years ago, and I never I read like the first 10 pages, and I didn't I stopped. So I'm glad that I finally got the chance to read it. Um, and yeah, that's all I got to say, man. Just give it a shot. Let me know what you think. See ya.